Kurt Russell is 75 years old, still working, still living on a ranch in Colorado, and still proving an entire industry wrong about a decision he made 4 decades ago. Most people know the films. Few people know the full story of what it actually cost him to make the choices that produced them, and why the warnings he received turned out to be the most incorrect predictions Hollywood ever delivered about one of its own. He was not supposed to survive the transition out of Disney. He was not supposed to build a career after leaving Los Angeles. He was not supposed to sustain relevance across 6 decades without making his career the central organizing fact of his existence. He did all three. And the way he did it reveals something about how durable success actually works that most people in the entertainment business still have not fully absorbed. To understand what Russell walked away from, you have to understand what he was walking away from first. Kurt Vogel Russell was born on March 17, 1951, in Springfield, Massachusetts. His father, Bing Russell, was a working character actor, best known as Deputy Clem on Bonanza, which meant the household Kurt grew up and treated performance as a normal part of daily life rather than something exotic or unusual. That early exposure gave him something most child actors never develop, a practical understanding of the craft rather than a starstruck relationship with it. By age 11, he had already appeared in an Elvis Presley film. By 15, Walt Disney himself had seen enough to sign him to a 10-year contract. That contract was not a minor thing. Disney in the mid-60s was the most powerful family entertainment institution in the world, and being named its primary teen star gave Russell a platform that most performers spend their entire careers chasing. Walt Disney reportedly described the teenager as someone with a great acting future ahead of him, which coming from Disney carried genuine weight. The films that followed built an audience across an entire decade. The Computer wore tennis shoes in 1969. Now You See Him, Now You Don't in 1972. The Strongest Man in the World in 1975. None of these were prestige productions, but they gave Russell consistent screen time and what he later described as his real education in how the film business actually functions from the inside. The problem with that education was its ceiling. Teen comedy roles inside a studio system built around family entertainment did not automatically produce a path to serious adult work. The industry had a long and well-documented history of consuming its young stars and producing very little on the other side. Actors who flourished as children frequently found that the associations attached to those early roles followed them in ways that were impossible to shake. Russell was aware of the pattern. Everyone around him was aware of it. What made his situation different from most was something that almost no one outside his immediate circle knew about at the time. He was also a genuinely gifted baseball player. Not a celebrity who played recreationally, but a serious athlete who made it into the California Angels minor league system in the early 1970s. He reached the Double-A level at El Paso in 1973. That summer, turning a double play, he suffered a rotator cuff injury that ended his baseball career before it ever reached the major leagues. The injury was devastating in the moment, but it also resolved a tension that had been running through his professional life for years. With baseball no longer a possibility, acting became the only path forward, and Russell committed to that path completely at exactly the right moment. His Disney contract was reaching its conclusion, and new collaborators were entering his world. The one who changed everything was John Carpenter. Russell was cast in the television film Elvis in 1979, playing the most iconic performer in American popular music across a demanding biographical drama that required physical transformation and emotional range he had never been asked to deliver before. The Emmy nomination that followed was a signal the entire industry could read. The Disney Kid had become something else entirely. A nomination for playing Elvis Presley tells the world that the performer who earned it has a capacity for serious, complex work. That nomination opened a door that the following decade would walk through with remarkable force. The 1980s are the period most people associate with Kurt Russell when they think about his career, and the reason sits entirely in his continued collaboration with Carpenter. Escape from New York in 1981 introduced Snake Plissken, a stoic, eye-patched antihero operating in a dystopian version of Manhattan. The character required Russell to project equal parts menace and credibility, and what he delivered felt genuinely new against the backdrop of everything he had done before. The film did not dominate the box office. It found its audience through the slower process of cult appreciation, which turned out to be a more durable form of success than opening weekend numbers ever produce. The Thing in 1982 pushed further into territory that the Hollywood mainstream was not ready to receive. A horror film set in Antarctic isolation, built around paranoia and an alien organism capable of imitating anything it encountered, The Thing arrived in the same summer as E.T. the Extraterrestrial and suffered in the comparison. The warmer, more optimistic Spielberg film dominated the cultural conversation, and The Thing struggled commercially in its initial release. What happened over the following decades is the more instructive story. The film earned recognition as one of the defining science fiction horror films ever made, and Russell's performance as MacReady, the helicopter pilot holding a disintegrating team together through mounting dread, became the anchor that kept the entire picture from collapsing under its own ambition. Big Trouble in Little China in 1986 revealed yet another dimension. The film blended action, comedy, and Chinese supernatural folklore into a tone that defied every available category, and Russell played Jack Burton, a truck driver who spoke with total confidence and delivered very little of it. The character was a precise comic subversion of the action hero archetype, requiring timing and restraint rather than physical dominance. It underperformed commercially on release. It became a cult touchstone that people are still talking about 40 years later. By the time Tombstone arrived in 1993, Russell had demonstrated across more than a decade that he could carry films in multiple genres without sacrificing the believability that made his characters function. His portrayal of Wyatt Earp opposite Val Kilmer's legendary Doc Holliday produced one of the most celebrated westerns of the modern era, a film that ranks consistently among the most rewatchable genre pictures of its generation. Stargate in 1994 placed him inside a science fiction epic that launched one of the more enduring franchise properties in genre entertainment. All of this was happening while Russell was doing something that Hollywood had told him would destroy everything. At a panel in Los Angeles in May 2026, Russell spoke openly about the decision he and Goldie Hawn had made more than 4 decades earlier to build their life in Old Snowmass, Colorado. The conversation revealed a man who had been making a quiet philosophical argument through his choices for 40 years and was only now receiving full credit for having been right. The move was not sudden or dramatic. Russell had developed a connection to Colorado during earlier years, drawn to the mountains, the open land, and the possibility of a ranching life that operated entirely outside studio schedules and award season obligations. When he and Hawn got together in the early 1980s, they made a shared decision to build something permanent in Old Snowmass. Their family grew up on that ranch. Their son Wyatt Russell now lives in Colorado with his own wife and children, extending what became a generational connection to the land his father chose against the advice of an entire industry. Russell described the appeal plainly. He wanted what Colorado offered every single day: the mountains, the nature, the ranching life, the sense of being somewhere because it was genuinely preferred rather than professionally required. He noted that Old Snowmass is populated by people who live there because they want to, and he could not say the same thing about Los Angeles. That distinction between choosing a place and being required by a career to remain in a place became the central axis of how he understood his own life. What made the decision remarkable was the context it happened inside. No major Hollywood actor was doing this when Russell made his choice. The entertainment industry of that era was built around Los Angeles in a way that felt almost physically necessary. Visibility meant presence. Presence meant proximity to studios, executives, and the social infrastructure of the film business. Choosing to live in Colorado was read by people inside the industry as a signal that the work no longer mattered enough to stay close to it. Russell recalled people telling him directly that the move amounted to farewell. The industry, in the assessment of those closest to it, did not accommodate actors who put mountain living ahead of networking and availability. His response to those warnings was simple and unwavering. He was not escaping. He was simply living where he lived. He acknowledged that he was fortunate the decision made no actual difference to the quality or volume of work that came to him. But that fortune had a foundation. Russell was selective about projects in ways that gave each commitment genuine weight. He did not take roles out of visibility anxiety or the pressure that came from being physically near the people making decisions. He chose work that interested him and delivered fully on each commitment. the absence of constant networking in Los Angeles did not translate into absence from major films. The filmography that followed the move makes the original warnings look like a profound misreading of what a career actually requires. Backdraft in 1991. Tombstone in 1993. Stargate in 1994. Breakdown in 1997. Miracle in 2004, in which his portrayal of Coach Herb Brooks producing the most improbable victory in Olympic hockey history delivered some of the most emotionally precise work of his career. Death Proof in 2007. The Hateful Eight in 2015. Guardians of the Galaxy in 2017. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 2019. Multiple entries in the Fast and Furious franchise. Every single one of these came from a man living on a Colorado ranch, not from someone embedded in the Los Angeles social ecosystem that the industry insisted was mandatory for survival at that level. The conversation around Russell in 2026 centers on The Madison, a neo-Western drama series created by Taylor Sheridan, released on Paramount Plus in March of that year. The series follows a New York family who relocate to the Madison River Valley of southwest Montana following a life-altering tragedy, and Russell plays Preston Clyburn, the patriarch whose relationship to the Montana landscape mirrors what Russell himself has built in Colorado across 4 decades. Michelle Pfeiffer stars opposite him, and the chemistry between two performers carrying that depth of combined experience produced something reviewers recognized immediately as something rare. The project found Russell through creative trust and a production willing to accommodate his existing commitments. He had filming obligations for Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, the Apple TV Plus series in which he and his son Wyatt shared the same role across different time periods of the story, a casting decision that gave the franchise an emotional dimension built around an actual father and son inhabiting the same character across decades. When scheduling conflicts with the Madison emerged, the production accommodated rather than recast, which says something specific about how strongly Sheridan and Pfeiffer wanted Russell for the role rather than the role filled by someone else. Season 2 was filmed back-to-back with Season 1. Season 3 has already been greenlit. The family dimension of Russell's life at 75 carries a texture that his earlier decades could not have anticipated. Wyatt Russell is now an established actor who has earned genuine critical recognition in his own right. The Monarch casting brought father and son into the same project in an unusually literal way, letting them share a character across different eras of the same story. Wyatt and his family now live in Colorado, extending the Russell family's relationship with the landscape that Kurt chose against industry advice a generation ago. Han, now 80, remains his partner after more than 4 decades together. The two have never married, a choice that attracted years of media curiosity from a culture that tends to treat long-term commitment as inseparable from legal documentation. Russell has spoken about that choice with characteristic directness. The relationship has endured and deepened not despite the absence of formal marriage, but through a continuous daily decision to build something shared. Their blended family, which includes Kate Hudson and Oliver Hudson from Han's prior marriage and Boston Russell from Kurt's, has by every visible account remained genuinely close across decades. At 75, Russell has not stepped back. The Madison demonstrates a continued appetite for substantial, narratively demanding roles. But the shape of his engagement has shifted entirely toward the intentionality he described wanting for decades. Projects are chosen because they genuinely interest him, because the collaborators excite him, because the material connects to something he actually wants to explore. The result is a career that continues to grow without the desperation that usually accompanies longevity built on financial anxiety or fading relevance. The warning Hollywood delivered 40 years ago has been answered by 4 decades of uninterrupted work that produced some of the most memorable performances in American film and television. The people who delivered those warnings were operating from an assumption that career and geography were inseparable, that the entertainment business could only function around people who made it the organizing principle of their daily existence. Russell tested that assumption and found it wrong. Not defiantly, not as a philosophical statement, but simply by deciding to live where he wanted to live and doing the work well enough that the industry kept calling. What his history exposes is a form of courage that does not look like courage from the outside. He did not quit. He did not issue declarations or burn anything down. He built a ranch in Colorado and kept showing up for projects that interested him, and those two decisions together produced something that 6 decades of conventional Hollywood behavior rarely delivers: a career without the corrosive compromises that usually accompany that kind of longevity. He did not sacrifice the life for the career. He chose both. And it turned out that choosing both was the most sustainable decision he could have made. When he talks about Old Snowmass now, there is no nostalgia in his voice. There is recognition. He describes waking up to the mountains. He describes wanting to be in Colorado more than his schedule currently allows. He describes his son living there now with his own young family. The ranch that Hollywood said would end everything became the foundation everything else was built on. And at 75, with the Madison finding new audiences and Monarch extending a franchise alongside his son, the career that was supposed to be over keeps finding new rooms to move through.